This is another episode of Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. And now the architects, Doug Pat and Stephen Chung.
You are listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast. My name is Steve and that is Doug. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning, Stephen. How you doing, man?
Hey, so I heard you got a neat project. At least it's something you interviewed for.
Yeah, this is something that could be really, really fun. It's a challenging project because it's in the inner city of Philadelphia. And the home was built in 1865. I went out on site and took a look at this thing. It's gorgeous. They've owned it for a number of years and they've gutted it. And so the interior is surprisingly contemporary. And they want to put a contemporary addition on this thing. So the building is such that it kind of steps as it moves back toward the alley. And so it's perfectly shaped for a kind of Lego block addition. So they're looking for something contemporary, and I'm hoping that I get the job. So interviewed about a week and a half ago. We'll see. They're probably interviewing other architects, and might be challenging to get it. But if I do, you'll hear more about it.
Yeah, we should follow up on this. I also have an interview next week, so this is what we have to do, right, to get jobs. But
yes, feed the beast.
In any case, today I'm real excited because it's a friend, it's a colleague from Boston that's joining us, David Eisen. I know David first, as an architect, but as a critic. He was a critic for the Boston Herald, which is our local paper, one of our local papers, and read many of his articles and then met him. I can't remember where exactly, but I've run into him on many occasions and told him about our podcast, and David happily agreed to join us. So David, good morning, and thank you again for doing this.
Good morning, and it's great to be here. And yeah, we've known each other for a while. And Steve, one of the things I've always admired about you, and in fact now both of you, is you're both practicing architects, and we'll call it in the media. I'm very involved with communications, and I got to say, there's too little of that communications in a really basic way between architects and the rest of the world. So I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. So, David, I know all about you. Doug probably knows something about you, but why don't you give our listeners a little background? Why did you become an architect? What's your kind of early years like? Where did you go to school? Some of the kind of things the highlights, let's say, of your career.
Well, I started in architecture when I was about 2 years old because my earliest memories were building things. It's what I always loved doing. And, maybe I didn't quite know and my parents didn't quite know. But as I got older and towards college age, it became really clear to me that I was an architect at heart. So I went to University of Illinois I went to school for 2 years. I dropped out of college. I was a carpenter for a couple of years. Always interested in design, but also in how things are built. And went back to school, got an undergraduate degree, worked for a couple of firms, went back to graduate school at Harvard. Steve, same place as you, although I think you were a few years behind me. I worked for a couple of architects and really wanted to do my own work. So I started teaching part-time while I built a practice. I started writing, and I loved doing that. I did a book and design kit for the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Viking Press that sold about 400,000 copies. So that was a lot of fun. And it was really talking for maybe 10-year-old kids at the bottom and, 110-year-old people at the top end, really talking about architecture in sort of fundamental ways that didn't dumb it down, but really got to the core of what matters in architecture. Same thing I did writing for the Boston Herald and the Boston Phoenix, and really the same thing I try and do as an architect. Think maybe and design in sophisticated ways, but anchor it to, shared values that everybody understands and believes in. So, and here I am many years later, still being an architect. We do a lot of different kinds of work. We always do residential work. I mean, from the very beginning, my first jobs, when I started to practice and when I was moonlighting for another firm, were small residential projects, additions, renovations, some new construction. And as we built a firm, we started doing bigger and bigger projects. But we've always done the residential because it's such a at the core of what architects do. There's nothing more fundamental than doing homes for people. But all of these other kinds of work, I think, have made me a better residential architect, kind of broaden my horizons on, on what you can do with somebody's house.
And right now your firm, I know, does a lot of housing, and you actually were
Yeah.
talking about how that actually informs even the single-family homes that you do.
Well, absolutely. And we do a lot of affordable housing. So what's interesting about that is you've got to do a lot with a little. And our goals for affordable housing are no different than they are for people who may have a bit more money. It's really to make, terrific places for people to live. But because we have fewer resources, there's less space, there's less money, we really have to think about what's kind of fundamental in making a great home. And I think a lot of the things I've learned doing affordable housing have made their way into projects that, may have a bigger budget. How do you use light? How do you use space? How do you connect to the outside? Big or small, these issues are really, they're similar issues.
Quick question for you. So what really interesting background, particularly the work that you've done in writing. Are you still writing and a practicing architect?
I don't do that much writing anymore, mostly because I don't have time to do it. But
Okay.
when I learned so much by writing, and after a while, I was doing a lot of writing, for the Boston Herald and the Boston Phoenix, when I wasn't competing with bigger firms, and I could write about their work, and no one would suggest there's any bias there. Now we're
Right.
doing bigger projects, so a lot of the writing I do now is for our firm, trying to communicate what we're trying to do. So it's been great background.
And how large
And
is the firm?
we are 10 people.
Okay.
So we
And
do
have
teeny
you
tiny
found
projects.
have you found that it stayed about that same size over the years, particularly through the recession?
Yeah, we do a fair amount of public work. So
Yep.
we got fewer and fewer single family homes or, businesses, but we were doing a lot of affordable housing. We were doing community centers. We were doing planning because there was public money when there wasn't private money. So we've been really
Right.
lucky.
Wow, that's great to hear.
When I was in your office, we were looking at one of your housing projects, and you related the social aspect of that of the housing project is very similar to what or how you would describe, let's say, a single family home. It was a similar kind of idea, right? Where you talked about a place where people would gather and there would be a communal kind of quality about it. And it seems like how in housing and in a house that the similar things in play. Explain that for our audience?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have all sort of, concentric layers in our lives. I mean, every one of us wants a private space. We can be out by ourselves. We can be with, a friend or one family member. We can be with the whole family. We can have friends over for Thanksgiving. We can have a big party. We want to open the door and go out on the porch or terrace and, see the neighborhood. We want to walk down the sidewalk to the street, say hello to our neighbors. So from very private to kind of very public, you want to be able to relate to the world. So whether we're doing a single family house, we tend not to say, oh, yeah, turn your back on the street. We encourage people, let's say, to have a front porch or a welcoming walkway that makes the street a better place. Maybe there's another outdoor space in the back that's semi-private. You just see your neighbor over the hedge and that's about it. So it might be a great big house or teeny tiny affordable housing. I think at our core, we're all very similar as human beings. We're all we want to be a less divided society. So by focusing on the things we all have in common, it's certainly been rewarding for me as an architect. And I feel like when we've done affordable housing, our clients respect the fact that we want to give them a great life and we're working for clients who have more money. There's a chance to talk about how we connect other people. Maybe you don't need an 8,000 square foot house. Maybe you can do more with little. And I don't want to wag my finger and lecture to people, but sometimes, I can really encourage them. Maybe you don't need 4 rooms. Maybe you can do more with less. Maybe you can have flexible spaces that can do a lot of different things rather than keep adding on room after room, whether it's a new house or an addition.
Well, it sounds like you have a wonderful working relationship with your clients. Is that where most of your work continues to come from, word of mouth?
Well, it depends. When we do public work, we apply for it. There'll be a kind of advertisement.
Okay.
it's a very public process and you have to fill out application forms. But yeah, overwhelmingly, well, I would say there are two sources. One is a lot of our work has been published, in magazines. We've won a bunch of awards. So sometimes someone will open up a magazine and say, wow, that's really cool. I wonder who's done that. And that's especially the case. We tend a lot of our work is in the Boston area, and especially if it's like the Boston Globe magazine. Someone will say, wow, I really admire what you've done. Sometimes it'll be word of mouth. It's always out of the blue. But it's great when it arrives. It's great to get that phone call. It's great to get that email. It's hard to go, right. You can't apply for residential work in the same way.
Right. Absolutely.
Hey, David. So every podcast, we ask our guests to talk about three things that are interesting or of interest to them now. It could be tips. It could be, just things that are sort of kicking around in your mind. What would you say those three things are for you?
Yeah. Well, and I touched on a couple of them. I mean, one of them is that communications is really fundamental, that architects should challenge their clients should challenge the architects, do it in a respectful way, but find a common ground because, Steve, you and I went to a school where there were all of these high-level academic discussions, that really dealt with core issues, how we relate to each other, the world around us, but they were couched in kind of academic terms. Everyone's interested in that. How can you talk about it in normal terms? Because I think words can help clarify. And one of the things when architecture's usually talked about, it's like stylistic things. Is it traditional? Right. Is it modern? If you can strip away the words that don't matter and use the words that do matter, like, how do you want to be able to control light? What do you want to be able to see when you look out the window? How many people at most might you want to make space for? What do you want in a space that's just for you or just for your son or just for your wife? You can really learn a lot from the client, and it'll really pull out from them what they're actually looking for, which may have, maybe very different what they say that they're looking for.
No, it's funny. let me just comment on that. So we call this Arcus speak, and I think that when you enter architecture school, of course, as a student, you want to learn it because it sounds great that you have all this jargon and you can talk to other architects, and at a certain moment it gets very confusing because nobody really knows what you're talking about, especially not architects, right? And then there is this transition that inevitably all architects have to encounter when they graduate and they finish and they begin talking to everyday people who are very smart, let's say, but just don't understand the language. And the architects that insist on talking up here somewhere in their own language, they can't communicate, as you say. And so for you, it's interesting as a writer, you were writing for, the masses, but also the Boston Herald. You're trying to reach a very wide demographic, and you really needed to find a way to speak to people so that they would understand. Otherwise, what was the point, right? I mean, this is not like an art journal. I mean, this was our everyday newspaper, right? So talk a little bit about that. How did you do that? I found that really challenging.
Yeah, well, what often happens is architects talk in Arcus speak, and nobody tells them, I have no idea what you're talking about. They feel like, it's their fault because they can't understand what the architect is talking about. And maybe after a while, a friend tells them, no, that architect just isn't communicating. And then they get like annoyed, like, why is he trying to pull something over on me? So, right from the beginning, before I started writing for the Herald, well, before that, I did this book for kids. So I was forced to look to avoid anything that could be considered jargon. And I had editors. So the editors didn't beat around the bush. If they didn't understand what I was talking about, they'd say, David, stop using those words. No one understands it. They could wag their finger at me. And we all need that from time to time, someone to point to us and say, you know what, you got to talk to me in a different way. So I got that. So, I did it for a whole bunch of years and sort of picked up on what would fly and what wouldn't fly.
Now, it's really important to stress then or underscore the idea that complex ideas don't need complex language. I mean, they don't have to be the same thing. And I think that when I was in school, you felt like, oh, this idea is so complex, I need to explain it in complex terms. And maybe actually, if I could explain it simply, people would appreciate the complexity in the design, which is really what I care about, not about the words.
And sometimes it isn't even really complex ideas. I mean, my sense is, I had a kid, 5-year-old kids are all architects because they intuitively understand space and spatial relationships. And the older they get, the more they forget about that. So I think someone, you're right, there are complexities you can layer on top of it, but at its core, it's so basic, it's so simple. Everybody understands what it's like to hug somebody else. It's so fundamental. I mean, spaces have almost that kind of intimacy, and if you don't turn yourself onto it, it is the most basic thing. But hey, we studied at this fancy university because there are infinite layers of complexity. So, you don't want to dumb it down, but you don't want to overcomplicate it. So I think that's the tightrope we all walk. And that's why sometimes it takes like 20, 30 years to be a good architect. There is so much to learn. Frank Gehry's 80 years old, 85 years old. He's still doing his most innovative work. It takes a while.
Wow. Well, let me simplify something for our viewers, our listeners here, rather based on something David said. So maybe instead of talking about style first, talk about very specific things in simple terms like light and view, the type of spaces, the size of spaces, and then let the style be informed perhaps by those things, or let the style be discussed at a later date, right? Would you say that's probably...
Absolutely, because what is modern architecture? To some people, it's all glass. To other people, it's like a box with little holes cut in it. I mean,
right.
Everyone has preconceptions. So the word modern interferes with understanding things. I mean, what's traditional architecture? Is it about there are traditional spaces that are really open up to views. So those are the first two words I would get rid of.
Right.
And then style Victorian style. I mean, what's that? Everyone knows it has a different idea,
right?
And as we know, like we were talking about, you can have a very traditional house with a very modern interior, modern addition to it. It depends on how well you make them work together. That's the key thing, not that label.
Great stuff.
All right, David, number two.
So we do community centers. We do libraries. We do senior centers. And it's really interesting. And most of them are pretty little. Some of them aren't that much bigger than a house. But in many ways, they should have a home-like quality. But spaces tend to be flexible. They tend to be more open. So often people think, oh, yeah, it's a house. I need a kitchen. I need a dining room. I need living room. I need bedrooms. And, well, sometimes those rooms can overlap. You don't need to have each one of those be in a box. And, the idea of living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom is fairly recent. Up until a couple hundred years ago, you had multi-purpose spaces that could serve different functions. And so looking forward, more and more people are thinking, wow, I'd like a big open loft space. Maybe I don't want to have my bed in the middle of it, but maybe I want my bedroom to have sliding doors so I can open up to it and close it down. And this is by, thinking about libraries and community centers is just one more way of help my firm rethink what a house should be. So it may start off with helping me bring up ideas for the client and maybe helping the client visualize a home that's somewhat different than where they grew up. And see, the best libraries, the best community centers have cozy corners. I mean, they're not just big open rooms with folding chairs. New schools. So, we do educational work. A great new school will have a little window seat, just big enough for one or two kids. So, that kind of informs how people think about their house. You could have a cozy corner within a bigger room that gives them more flexibility. Because one of the things I've noticed, a lot of the early work we did was someone would have a center entry colonial, living room, dining room, kitchen. They say, oh, we want a big family room. We'd build the big family room, add on to the kitchen. They would totally abandon the living room and dining room because that's not what they wanted. They wanted a big, flexible space, more like something you might have a library or a community center. And now we say, you know what? Rather than building a whole new house attached to your old one, maybe you can reconfigure the existing spaces so you use them better rather than essentially having the old house and the new house stuck together.
So David, how would this, let's say, because you get these calls, someone says, hey, I want to build a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2,000 square foot house with 2-car garage, and they basically give you these rooms.
Yeah.
How does it happen where you begin to sort of, I guess, have a conversation and really sort of realize maybe that's not what they're looking for. They're not really looking for 3 boxes and 4 boxes and 5 small boxes and 2 big boxes. How do you tease that out?
Well, one way to do it, and probably the best, is to go beyond words and show pictures. And obviously, we like to start out with pictures of our work. And we can say, well, there's a space to eat, there's a space to lounge around, there's a space to cook. They're not completely separated one from the other. And furniture can be moved around. And sometimes people say, yeah, of course. And sometimes it's like, oh, I didn't realize that. And, I was in a friend's house a few years ago that was exactly like that. It was terrific. I forgot about it. But the pictures help trigger memories, and then attaching words to it, because sometimes people look at pictures and they don't know what they're looking at. Their 5-year-old kid knows what they're looking at, but adults may not. So to use words to suggest, well, there really is a living room and a dining room and a kitchen here, but they've been redefined. And I think often there's like this, oh my God, yeah, I didn't realize that. So, and then that's the beginning of the discussion. And sometimes they say, well, this looks too open to me. I don't think I'd ever be comfortable with that. And the issue that there are dials, quote unquote, that you can turn up and turn down. At one end of the dial are completely separate rooms with like little doors between them. At the other end of the dial is one completely open space with infinite flexibility. And you can, quote unquote, turn the dial between the two in an infinite number of ways. So one of the things, we might do a number of studies, more open, more closed, more connected, until the sound is right, so to speak, on in that dialogue. We find the right balance. And with 3-dimensional imaging, it's much easier to do it. So we might start out with pictures of what's already there, go to 3-dimensional images, and then work through the issues.
What you're talking about sounds a lot like what's happening to the family room and kitchen. So for the last 100 years or 200 years, I'm not sure what it is, we had them in separate boxes. And, people visit other people's homes and they can see that they're living very comfortably in a family room and a kitchen that are one giant room. And so, while many people say, well, that's on its way out, it seems like a pretty comfortable way to live. And I'm still working on houses that are just like that. So those two spaces are kind of melting back together again.
Yeah, and the question is, do you also need a living room and dining room on top of that?
Right.
And I think we've all been in family rooms that are like big barns. So some of that overreaction is the quote-unquote great room. It's like 2 scales.
Right.
It's a big box. So what we try and do is have it feel open, but have cozy corners, or have suggestions of how it can be divided up so you're not like swimming around in it. One of the things I've noticed is to eat in a 2-story space is sometimes more comfortable than having an intimate conversation on a couch in a 2-story space. Yeah. So we really try and differentiate it. To be in a big 2-story box can be as uncomfortable as being in a stiff dining room completely separated from the living room and the kitchen. So it's those dials again. We're on that continuum where people comfortable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, it seems to me that clearly a very cerebral architect, and this is what is missing out when clients don't hire people to help them through this process, is, they have a preconceived notion of what they want, and they either buy it from a book or they design it that way, and they never get to talk to anybody about what these spaces mean to them. So this is why it's so important to get a professional involved, in my opinion, especially talking with you.
Well, absolutely. And I guess what I try and do is, on the one hand, be cerebral. That I'd like, when I walk out of the room, for someone to say, wow, David's a really smart guy. And at the same time, I'd like them to say, but he's really warm and he's really engaging and he's not highfalutin and he may be smart, but he never uses his smartness to make me feel like I'm dumb. He's making his smartness make me feel like I'm smart, So that's my hope, because there are people, no one wants to feel like they're dumb. Same with doctors, same with lawyers. The best doctors and lawyers are warm and engaging and draw out from you what you're looking for. So at least that's my hope. But absolutely, I don't think, just figuring out what you're doing on a graph paper at the dining room table or just talking to a contractor, too rarely do you get the smart, the cerebral and the engaging, and the ability to talk about it and the ability to sketch it out. So I think, the reason a lot of us went into architecture is because we're part scientist, we're part artist, we're part sociologist, we're part psychologist, and it combines all of this stuff. It's really a firm for, it's really a field for jack of all trades, and it makes it fun.
The psychology part is really interesting because, sometimes people think, oh, I should just hire this really talented person, whatever. And in fact, what you're kind of explaining is that you really need to get together and really get to know each other. And there has to be a comfort level there. There has to be this feeling that this person you're going to work with, the architect, he or she is really thinking with you, trying to do their best to help make this place for you. Sometimes you lose track of that. You think that I'll hire this architect because they'll make this amazing thing for me. When in fact, it really should be this collaborative thing. And I think for you, a good architect is someone who's listening and working with you to tease out whatever it is that will make them happy ultimately. It means they have to listen. The idea that the architect's going to be over there off to the side and not listening is not the right way, maybe. And I think, especially in media, you hear that, oh, this is tortured genius over there, and I'll show up and here, this is your house. And probably we should get away from that. I think you probably believe in that. That's probably not the best way for us to promote, but to sort of let people think that's what we're about.
No, absolutely. And I think there's maybe this kind of misconception that the more talented an architect is, the more aloof they are, the more arrogant they are.
Right.
And, and I just don't think that that's the case. It's interesting. It's just like back to Frank Gehry. If you listen to him talk and close your eyes and don't look at what's on the screen, he talks in such a normal way. He's just a really normal guy using normal words about incredibly inventive stuff. And then there are people who are warm and engaging who have no talent. So talent really is important. Just because they're listening and nodding their head and taking notes and really talking in a convincing way, they may come back with something that's like, totally uninteresting, totally uninspiring because they have no talent.
Right.
But you don't have to choose. I think when someone's looking for an architect, they should look at the talent and an ability to talk. Again, same with any profession. Same with doctors, same with lawyers. You want to get both sides of it, and they're out there.
Great point. Okay, so number 3, David.
Number 3, affordable housing. So we do a lot of that. So sometimes people think that, their house is really about showing off their wealth. Got to make it bigger. My neighbor just did a 2,000 square foot addition. I'm going to do a 3,000 square foot addition. Really disabuse people of the notion that more is better, whether it's more money, whether it's more space. He has a 2-story great room. I want a 3-story great room. It's really not about quantity. It's really about quality. And I learned that part of it's just like what I believe as a person. And I've learned in part by doing affordable housing, by doing very limited budget projects, and really doing what we feel is like really good jobs with it, winning awards and getting published for projects that had like just an incredibly tiny budget and incredibly constrained. That's when you really need the brilliance. So that's what we encourage people to do. Don't necessarily abandon the old rooms and build new rooms. Don't make it bigger, make it better. And what that means, those are just words. And sometimes people do a lot of entertaining and they really do need a big space. But get to the core of what will make them happy as human beings, as parents, as kids, as, day-to-day level. And sure, impress your friends, but do it in ways that really matter. One of the things people, I'm building a 10,000 square foot greenhouse. I don't think there is such a thing as a 10,000 square foot greenhouse. If you really believe in sustainability, you don't have to have it teeny tiny. You don't have to deprive yourself, but you do want to think how to do the most with the least in terms of quality of life. And my wife and I, we bought a place, we renovated it at 1,100 square feet. We raised a kid there. Maybe some people need more than 1,100 square feet, but it doesn't feel like 1,100 square feet because everywhere you look, it's in the middle of Cambridge. We're hemmed in on all sides, but lights coming in from all directions, spaces connect with each other. We didn't need more space. That's affordable housing size. So, hey, 2,100 to 3,100 square foot. I don't want to talk anybody about, they shouldn't give themselves what they want. But, I think a critical dialogue. So I really feel like the best client-architect relationships, the client can really push on the architect. What is the architect's, what are their preconceptions? And the architect can push back in a trusting sort of, back and forth. I think that's where the best results come from. And by best results, I don't mean getting published in magazines. I mean clients who are really, really happy, and then they want you to get it published because they're so happy. They love to win awards, just verify that, it's as great as they thought it was. So, that's what makes me happy as an architect. It makes my firm happy. It makes my partner happy.
Well, that's an awesome way to I think, end. Doug, do you have any final thoughts or questions for David?
Well, it sounds like David's saying, at least in terms of some of this work with limited budgets, that they create limitations that actually make you more creative, which ultimately makes your work better, and then the work that you do after that work better. So those limitations are important to keep you creative.
Well, absolutely. And you mentioned doing a challenging project. Challenges are good, and one of the challenges is limited money. One of the challenges is limited space. So absolutely. I totally agree with that.
David, how can our listeners find you or learn more about you, or if they have questions and want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Well, the best thing to do is to go to abacusarchitects.com. And there's actually, I think, another Abacus Architects in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. But we are abacusarchitects.com. We're in Boston. We do work all over, although a lot of it's in the New England area. So that's probably the best way to go. And
what about the kit, the book, the thing in the museum that I know you from?
So it's been out of publication because it had its heyday just a couple of years before computers took over everything. So we did an early computerized version, but then all the technology changed. So this is rubber stamps in a book, but if you go to, it's called Fun with Architecture. So type in Fun with Architecture, it'll probably take you to Amazon.com. And every time I see someone selling their copy, it pains me a little bit, but there are people who are selling their copies. So, you can go take a look at that. And it was a really fun project. And hey, you can buy a copy of Fun with Architecture for yourself or your kids.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you very much again for doing this. And I know you'll keep writing and keep doing what you're doing, which I always admire. So I'm not sure what form that'll take next, but I'm sure you'll be continuing to do your work besides your design work, but also your writing and communication.
And I don't know what form it'll take either, but it'll be a pleasant surprise as it evolves. Well, thank you very much. This has been great talking with you, and great indirectly talking to your podcast listeners. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, David. Website looks great. Works beautiful.
And if you come back in like another 6 weeks, we actually have a lot of new stuff we're going to put on. And this podcast is one more incentive to get more recent work on. But don't hesitate to go to abacusarchitects.com because there's a lot of stuff on there.
So you've been listening to Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. Remember to shoot us an email with your questions. We love to hear from you. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to next time.